Thank you for staying with us. Still basking in the euphoria of the celebration of Nigeria at 63, the federal government and organized labor are now dealing with the impending strike by the workers, which is scheduled to commence tomorrow. In a last-minute move to avert the strike by organized labor, the federal government announced a 35,000 naira increase in salary for all workers for the next 6 months. The federal government met with the leadership of the Nigeria Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress on measures to address the dispute arising from the removal of subsidy on premium motor spirit.
I am happy to say that after 4 hours, we have reached certain agreements that inure to the benefit of the Nigerian worker. Agreements on wage bill, agreements on committees, on salary increment, agreement on the CN bosses, agreement on several other things, I believe, both TUC, labor, and government side.
We have looked at almost all the issues, all the promissory notes, from the government, and we looked at how to translate them to reality, and to be workable. And then we're going to take those promises to our organs. Of course, these people here cannot just wake up and review and call off action. So, like he said, we're hopeful that our organs will have a look at them and give us a fresh mandate on what next to do.
Well, joining us in the studio is the convener Campaign for Dignity in Governance, Razak Ulukoba. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. Good morning, my sister. How are you? happy Independence Day.
Absolutely. Same to you. Holiday, actually. We also have joining us via Zoom from the UK, a policy analyst, Shijibumi Adebiyi Bennett. Shiji, good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Happy Independence.
All right, same to you. Let me begin with you, Shijibumi. This statement or disagreement finally reached between the federal government and Labour, although Labour has said that it is going back to review some of the agreements reached with government, the conversation, especially the aspect of reviewing the 25,000 naira increment to about 35,000 naira, as well as seeking commitment from government with regards to the compressed natural gas buses, ensuring their speedy delivery to ease transportation cost, public transportation cost for Nigerians. I wonder if you see that as something that Labour will consider to call off their strike.
I see that as something, not just the promises, but the communication. Most importantly, transparency and communication are vital in any negotiation. And I think what Labour has always complained about is the fact that the federal government seems not to have its time in addressing all the issues they've raised. And at a point in time, they also said, because the chief of staff seemed to be busy, and they wanted him to be changed in terms of the leadership of the delegation of the government. And I didn't see any much difference from what the federal government has said before with what compared to what's contained in the address of the president yesterday. The only thing that was just different was the wage award. That was the difference. But I think the fact that they were listened to, they were called, and there was interface between.
But they've been having engagements with the Minister of Labour, talking about Simon Lalong and some other persons. I mean, isn't he a representative of government who has been giving them the time?
I know that, but every time they had those engagements, I always try to see the resolutions and conclusions from those, and I never see any. I didn't see any concrete resolution. The last time we had an address from the Minister of Labour, Simon Lalong, say, and the address was like, the federal government will get back to them. We don't want any strike. It will enhance the hardship the people are already facing, and the particular issues raised by Labour were not addressed. Like I said in the president's speech yesterday, the wage award was just the difference. The CNG that have been talked about was still talked about with no time limit, no timeline set for the CNG, maybe for the conversion or for the centers to be seen around the country. But so many things happen behind the scenes, which you don't see in press conferences, which you don't see in speeches. And there is what is called the body language and the disposition of the negotiators as well. So it's easy for people to see honesty and transparency, sincerity by the time they sit down together and by the time they resolve issues than what we will see in the speeches and the press conferences granted after those meetings. But like I said, I have not seen much difference in the statements made and in the conclusions and resolutions, apart from what had already been said. The wage award, the 25K or the 35K as the case may be, was just the only difference. And I think Labour will consider all those things and not just cause more hardship on Nigerians, because that would be very, very severe. The economy is having its own toll, is having the toll on Nigerians now. We don't want a situation whereby the situation will become worse.
Right. Okay, so Shijibomi, let's put you on hold and come back to the studio to get views of Razak Olokoba. So what do you think about, this current stage of meeting between the federal government and Labour? Are you hopeful that Labour will reconsider its stance? Did the government do well, in its own negotiations?
In the first instance, the call for strike to some of us is not appropriate, given the situation we find ourselves in Nigeria. But as a Labour person, if you look at the issue from the lenses of Labour as a Labour activist, and for someone who has also been participating in government as consultant on Labour matters and other related matters, what has broken down between the two institutions is trust. Labour knew very well that the country is in a bad shape. But because of the lack of trust, if you allow this government to stabilize before addressing our issues, they may not talk about it for a long time. And that's the lack of trust. And for government too, the assertive nature of Labour brings to the mind of the government like an institution that has been politically compromised. That is not an issue that has just begun today. It's been there for a long time. When we took part in government as consultants, we had to pacify both parties that we have to put the question of this mistrust aside if we must work together. And that's my appeal to Labour now, that there's a need for the Labour to understand the peculiar situation our members of the government find themselves at the moment. The judiciary and the parliament is not looking good for the government at all. And for also the government to also be more open to Labour, so that when you become more open to Labour, they will understand the difficult situation you find yourself. For instance, now, we have been saying that Labour should not be going to the government only. That the workforce of the government in Nigeria today is up to 10-20%. It's the private sector that has the largest workforce. So what is Labour doing about that? The MD of BUA announced a reduction in price. And those were part of task of Labour, that you need to approach the sectors that define how we live our life. The food we eat, the house, the transportation, that what is the actual cost of building a house, then why are you putting a rent for 3-bedroom flat in Lagos at so price? They will tell you the challenge. Then the labor will then approach cement producers, and if there are challenges, you go back to government. So this back and forth and expanding your responsibility as an institution that should be playing vital role is also missing in labor, and those should be part of the demand from the government too. That if you are telling us this, you know that we don't have control over certain things. The government should be telling labor that, but you are more effective in playing certain role in these areas and area. You have to identify it for labor, and that is what the civil society are also saying, that you should not limit your, because your strike is going to affect government and someone who has nothing to do with government. If you strike today, the airport will be closed up, the fuel will not sell, so many things. So the fact that your strike will affect all of us is the more reason why you should not only be talking to the government. So we have got to a very stage now where labor seems to now box the government to kind of so to say, to be able to concede what they have conceded. And I know that even if they are not boxed,
has he really done that? Has he really boxed the government?
No. If you look at the concession made now,
yeah,
you will know very well that given the pulse of the government today, to concede 25,000 naira to multiply by number of workers, it's huge.
Because the question is, it's not enough to just mention it. It is when it is done, then you can perhaps categorically say that.
If the president says something, Tinubu says something, I can take it to bank. So I know very well that for him to have said that, he has done his mathematics and arithmetic about what it's going to cost the government. I know very well. If there's no conclusion about that, calling about what is our pulse, can we avoid that? He won't mention it. That's one. And two is that one of the other things that NLC should help Nigerians to do is to limit the attention on federal government. The government kept saying that this palliative
states
is a joint venture between us and the state. We have established infrastructure a fund. What is the state doing about it? To what extent? So we have to also document how far the state have gone, because minority plus minority becomes majority. If the state were doing the little they can do, plus the little ones the federal government is going to do, and the private sector, the effect of subsidy will not be this much on us. So the responsibility now for federal government is the beginning, because we have to itemize the demands. Labor knew very well that those demands cannot be met at once. And out of the demands that has been itemized, a few has been indicated that we are going to start with this. So, for federal government, it's commendable for what they have done. And which shows clearly that it is enough if the labor don't have anything to take back to their members, to their various organizations that were affiliated to NLC and TUC. They won't call off the strike. But they've been provided with bullets now to go and marshal their points at their Congress or whatever level they are going to have their argument that these are things we brought back. It's about 5 things: the CNG, the infrastructural account, because the government must begin to hammer it. I've done something about for the state. Can you also ask the state to account for that too?
All right.
Then the salary. So this is the stage you find ourselves, and it's enough for labor to consider their stance. The effect on the country is going to be very decisive.
Right. Shijibomi, let's bring you in. What's your take on this in view of what you've initially said as to the grouse Labour has against the federal government? Well, now Razak here is talking about, how effective has Labour been? All what we've seen so far is, some form of buffers for federal civil servants, for civil servants. But then the larger chunk of Nigerians are those in private sector and the informal sector. Who is speaking for them?
The informal sector, which is a sector I also operate in and I belong to, has been left on its own for a while. And sometimes we have to fend for ourselves. That's the way it's been. And for a long time, it's always been like that until recently, when state governments and the federal government is now, talking about different funds and grants for that sector. The only profit of the informal sector in all of this is the investment funding for entrepreneurs. That is the only area, that's the only aspect where the informal sector can benefit. The other areas where the informal sector can benefit is maybe in the inflation of the economy. I mean, when you pump money into the economy, so people can have more purchasing power, so that can help the informal sector. Then, like the price of cement that is going down, if prices of other stuff can go down, that can help the informal sector. So, and if you see what some states like the Lagos state government, the Anambra state government, they are doing in terms of trying to have some kinds of grants. Other states are also doing that, some kinds of grants. The Edo state is also doing something like that. Have grants for entrepreneurs and people in that informal sector. So those are the areas where the informal sector can get their own profit or benefit from all of these things. Apart from that, it's just the informal sector will have to profit from the consequential gains made in reflating the economy. So not directly, but indirectly. But all the things that, like the investment funding, we find its own benefit on that side. But Razak touched on some things that I want to talk about. What has Labour been doing since all these days? It's good to focus on the government a lot of times, which always yield the result, because by the time Labour wants to go on strike, the federal government has to come to the negotiating table. Part of the responsibility of Labour is not just to defend its workers, it's not just to find a way to get benefit for workers, but part of it is also research and policy development. And this is what he talked about the other time, that it may seem very vague in terms of trying to come about what's the price of cement, how can we get better standard of living for our people instead of wage increment. Because by the time you focus only on wage increment, then the wages increased, but inflation also takes the value down. So the most important thing is the standard of living of the people, in terms of the infrastructure, housing for people, for workers, government workers and private workers, how they can have access to cheap houses. Then what about the CNG we're even talking about? The deliberations and the consultations didn't start today. It started from Buhari's administration. And Labour was among the people that sat down with the government at that time. The CNG was supposed, I remember very well that the minister was saying at that time that they were supposed to convert 200,000 cars within a year or two. That was, I think, 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So the conversation has started a long time ago. Labour was part of that conversation. Was there any monitoring Labour did along the line to make sure that to ensure the government made those CNG centers available? If those things had been done at that time, we won't be at the negotiation table at this time talking about where the CNG conversion centers will be, how many percent discount will the government be giving. So, and focus on the states as well. The NLC is talking about NURTW issue in Lagos State. Are they starting to talk about it now? Will they talk about it when it happens in Ondo State, or in my state in Ekiti, or in some other states like maybe in the north or southeast, when they start their problems there? So how many issues are we delving into? What are the benefits of these issues to the masses in itself? because some issues can be resolved by court cases and all that. The people know how to resolve their issues because there are avenues and there are frameworks to the solutions of those issues. So what is Labour doing about research and policy development? That is participation in regulatory processes and policies. What is Labour doing about that? How are they going to make to hold the governors accountable? 2 billion has been given to each state governor. Has Labour intensified efforts to know how those governors have spent those monies? So the focus cannot just be on the federal government every time. I sometimes I don't get it, because it's like everybody does things for the camera. I may be incorrect, but that's the way I see it. You go to Abuja, you have meetings, you want to call on strike, so everybody does.
Well, Shiji, in the last conversation I had with a representative of Labour, he said that the state chapters of the NLC were looking into the books in terms of the monies that the 2 billion that you mentioned that were given to state government, that they were looking into the books and that the reports will come out later. Not now, but it will come out. The reports will come out later. That is what he said.
They bring out a report about the federal government palliative for.
I am not speaking for. I'm not a spokesperson.
I'm responding to him.
But
now.
then that was what he said.
He will likely be watching this program.
Right.
I'm responding.
So, but my question still stay with you, Shiji, is from what you are saying, it's seeming like Labour is running out of ideas. Labour does not understand how it is meant to deal with the issues that actually affects the average Nigerian worker.
Yes. Now, let me, as a student of history and who tries to know what each aspect of governance and government is supposed to do, if we have to talk about the responsibility of Labour, you have to build strong coalitions, engage in political advocacy. So many people blame them for supporting a political party at the time they did last election. It's perfectly okay because it's part of the responsibility. They can endorse and support any political party that is in alignment with their ideals. Public education, that's one other thing Labour is supposed to be doing. Grassroots mobilization, lobbying, not just government, but private enterprises, trying to get the best deals for the people, not just one person inflating price per time. If the price of cement, for example, is hiked from, let's say, 3,000 naira, which had happened before, to 5,000 naira, and people have said it's because of this, it's because of that. Labour has the responsibility to call those manufacturers to the table, not just the government, and sit them down to calculate how they arrived at the particular price. Like the price of bread, for example, you have the mandate to say this affects the people. How did you arrive at this price? Those are the things, standard of living. But that's why I said everything is about the camera. So every Labour leader, to me, that's my opinion, wants to say, during my own dispensation, I was able to get it a minimum wage of so, because we held the government by the jugular. We were going to embark on a strike. For me, it's not commonsensical, because no matter what you get, inflation can erode all the values. So electoral strategies, legal action, so many responsibilities, we can count them, that Labour has, but we have always seen them just focus on one: federal government, strike, a minimum wage. See, and if this I know this government will accede to many of their requests, because the government has made so many promises without forcing them to make those promises, and they look like they're serious in implementing better reforms for the country. Right. And if they do not do that, that would be like a very, very big dent on the government. If not, I can assure you that if it wants to be an unserious government, the next 4, 5, 6 years, we will still be talking about CNG as we are referring to it now, when it started 4 years or 3 years into the second term of the.
All right, Shiji, let's quickly get the views. We're inching to the top of the hour now. Mr. Lokopa, so what do you think? To what extent do you agree with the notion that NLC, for example, can adopt or endorse any candidate, so to speak? We saw it slant during the election, and that also seems to be like a sort of a sword over NLC's thinking, at this time, how much in the right are they, or are they rather pandering to an opposition party?
To me, the pattern adopted by Labour this time around is very alien. Political party must have a manifesto so that when your candidate is coming and you place it side by side with the manifesto of the Labour Party, nobody will tell you that, okay, they have similar manifesto. But if it's going to be on the strength that I lost a ticket in a particular party and I jump into Labour Party because of a personal relationship you have with the personality, so that is what is wrong. You must, a country must be assertive enough to insist that political party must stand for an ideology. So if it is the ideology that brought them together, that is fine. Labour has its own manifesto and ideology, and I've read it several times. The ideology and the president candidate of Labour in the last election were direct opposite of each other. And I can begin to mention it one after the other. So if it's on the basis of that, Labour was wrong. You will know very well someone who is a Labour person, even if he has not belonged to political party of a Labour. So it is the reason why Nigerians are worried that, so if it is like this, that means anything you say about the current government is a suspect.